Hello, everyone, and welcome back to CTM Festival's Research Networking Day. And this is the second session we are having this afternoon. The title of this session is Asymmetries in Sonic Experiences of Power. And it's going to be hosted by Christoph Jacke, who I'm going to introduce right now. Christoph's research focuses on media, culture, and communication theory, cultural studies, celebrity studies, and popular music studies. And he's professor of theory, aesthetics, and history of popular music, and course director of the bachelor and master program Popular Music and Media at the Department of Music at the Paderborn University here in Germany. Christoph has published several books such as Einführung in populäre Musik und Medien or Medien Subkultur, and he has also edited the books Texte zur Theorie des Pop and the Perspectives on German Popular Music, published on Routledge in 2017. He's also a journalist and has published articles in Spex, Kaput, Testkart, Frankfurter Rundschau, Intro, Rolling Stone, Debug, and Die Aufhebung, and many other prominent German language music and culture magazines. So I will pass on to Christoph now. The stage is yours, and I'm really happy that you're here, Christoph.
Thank you. Thank you, Anita. And I'm happy to be here for the third time, I think. First time complete contactless and digitally. The other ones were in the Kunsthaus Bethanien. So sorry for not being there, but in Münster at home, my home office. And thank you so much for your invitation and the cooperation with the Paderborn University. Special thanks to of course, to you, Anita, and to the CTM. Anyway, so here we are, contact. The how of contact, it was mentioned in the module 1 today, how to contact, the how of contact. And I immediately thought about contactless contact. So the theme of the CTM seems to be quite fitting, and my brain is already working. And after the 3 first presentations, I saw it's even more working. So I'm very happy to have 4 more presentations in this module 2, Asymmetries and Sonic Experiences of Power. We're going to have 4 presentations, all about 10-minute films. Then we have got short Q&As between the presenter and me, and then we and if there are questions, of course, we can refer to them. And after the 4 presentations, we've got the famous 15 minutes of group discussion. So anyway, the 4 presentations. The first presentation is going to be by Kathleen Shepherd from Bristol University of West England on caring to listen, and I'm going to introduce this in a second. The second presentation is by Hakeem Adam from University of the Arts in Bremen on postcolonial identity and research on it through digital media and the archive. The third one's going to be by Lottie Sebes from the Berlin University of the Arts, and it's going to be on the sounding sewing machine and the revoicing of gendered media places. And the fourth, but not the least, last but not least, is the Ultimate Leisure Workers Club from Vilnius in Lithuania, represented today by Noah and Exiting the Domestic Factory. So, coming to the first one, which has got a very exciting title, I think. Today, I've got the feeling we talk a lot about care, about capitalism, about systems, and about sickness. That's my impression from the first module already now. Kathleen Shepherd is an artist, writer, researcher, educator concerned with making disruptive, socially engaged, site-specific artwork. And what I find very fascinating, and I think we're coming back to this now, is that she's practicing art, she's engaged in art, and at the same time, she's observing it and doing research on it, which is a very interesting approach, I think, a very important approach. So don't want to talk any longer. Kathleen Shepherd, please show us Caring to Listen, AKA Capitalism Makes Me Sick. What a nice subtitle.
Everyone, really nice to be here today at the CTM Researcher Networking Day. My name is Kathleen Shepherd and I'm an artist, researcher and educator. And in this presentation, I'm going to introduce and summarise my current practice, which has recently culminated in the completion of my practice-based PhD, Caring to Listen. It's a body of work that takes aim at critiquing and disrupting the reproduction of Eurocentric patriarchal capitalist values in the specific context of socially engaged arts practices in the UK. I just want to read this quote by Bell Hooks briefly. Let me begin by saying that I came to theory because I was hurting. The pain within me was so intense that I could not go on living. I came to theory, desperate, wanting to comprehend, to grasp what was happening around and within me. Most importantly, I wanted to make the hurt go away. I saw in theory then a location for healing. So what's wrong with Eurocentric patriarchal capitalism? Eurocentricity defines a form of knowledge rooted in rationalism, male dominance, and a fragmentary, divisive, and polarizing worldview. It's a term that defines a capitalist ontology and one that treats everything as a marketized experience, from housing to work to love to sleep and the production and consumption of food. This pervasive business ontology is fiercely exploitative, hyperproductive, sleep-deprived, and individualistic. My use of the term capitalism describes a society organized around an economic system that advocates the accumulation of capital, of private property, the assimilation of profit at the expense of workers who do not own the means of production. The accumulation of capital is extracted from the face of the earth and from human bodies dripping in blood. At times, I refer to capitalist realism, an idea advanced by late Mark Fisher, who describes a political and social state defined by, quote, a pervasive atmosphere conditioning not only the production of culture, but also the regulation of work and education as acting as a kind of invisible barrier constraining thought and action. The patriarchy is a term that recognizes that certain privileges are endowed to men at the expense of women. We see this in the gender pay gap, domestic labour normalised as female, caring roles such as nurses, childcare practitioners and palliative care nurses being predominantly women, and in sexual and physical violence against women still at large within everyday life. So what is the aim of my research? The aim of Caring to Listen is to better understand experiences of socioeconomic inequality amongst artists in the field of socially engaged art in the UK. I asked the question, can listening practices help understand how class background shapes creative ideas and experiences of success when working as a socially engaged artist? The context of my research are three fields of intellectual and artistic inquiry: socially engaged art and its shortcomings, theories and practices of care, theories and practices of listening. So why is this research important? It's vitally important to remain critical of the pervasiveness of Eurocentric patriarchal capitalism. This is important because this system normalizes banal and extreme forms of violence, forms of socioeconomic discipline and notions of success contingent on the systemic exploitation of people and ecosystems. Secondly, Eurocentric patriarchal capitalist values are flagrantly reproduced in the UK creative and cultural industries and the arts at large beyond the UK. We see this in competitive individualism, the production and consumption of artistic artifacts as status symbols for the global elite, and a profoundly undiverse workforce. Thirdly, the conditions of labour within the creative and culture industries have been exposed to be precarious, coming with significant hidden costs, validation gaps, and are inaccessible to people without a surplus of creative, social, and economic capital. So how do I go about doing this research? Here you can see the method that I've designed called the Dynamic Praxis Research System. Building on the work of academics Robin Nelson and Bell Hooks, I've developed this methodology. This system is comprised of 6 flows that define and explain my praxis, process, and methods. In terms of practical research methods, I conduct primary, secondary, and practice-based research, reviewing and analyse relevant literature and artistic practice, conducting primary research with audiences who've experienced my work, and making new artworks that experiment with audio documentary, testimonies of lived experiences, and convivial listening practices in public spaces. Here are some images of recent works I've made. This is some documents of a socially engaged project I did while I was artist in residence at Norwest Media Centre in Bristol, where I interviewed residents of the same street over a period of 3 months and made a site-specific listening piece as a final output. So what are my findings from undertaking Caring to Listen? Firstly, my practice-based findings. I'm going to show you some images of my practice in the next few slides. I propose that theories and practices of care are an approach and a method to better understand the experience of class inequality amongst artists working in UK-based socially engaged art practices. I define a new method of doing socially engaged art that enables people to sit and listen together to personal stories of everyday life and inequality. I've designed and developed the convivial listening protocol as one way of outlining this method. Thirdly, incorporating an auto-theoretical approach into my praxis has allowed me to conduct my work in a way that encourages me to give voice and acknowledge aspects of my personal class lived experience that I've previously struggled to articulate. In doing my socially engaged art practice, I enact a form of caring that notices unmet caring needs. I give sustained attention and recognise that there is a need to take more care to act on cultural, structural and social inequalities normalised in the creative and cultural industries and society at large. Findings arising from secondary research show that while there's an established body of knowledge into workforce inequality in the creative and cultural industries, there is currently a paucity of research in the field belonging to socially engaged art. One of the reasons socially engaged art practices is a relatively under-researched area in terms of class barriers to participation is because socially engaged art is not named within current definitions of cultural and creative industries. Lastly, socially engaged art practices are chronically underfunded, with socially engaged artists routinely working more hours than they're paid for and shouldering personal, psychological and ethical costs. Findings arriving from primary research, from getting feedback and interviewing audiences that have engaged in my work in some way, are that situated convivial listening was for many people new and unusual, that listening can prompt self-consciousness and self-reflection, that listening can be a form of care, and that listening in situ creates listening experiences enmeshed with and shaped by specific oral and physical geographies. So, to conclude, socially engaged arts and the creative and cultural industries are not accessible or equal to all. Some people will be better resourced, structurally advantaged, and better able to dream of being, let alone start working as an artist. If these structural and cultural exclusionary tendencies go unchecked, what risks happening is the art world and the creative industries make minor adjustments to the neoliberal status quo, and at worst, reproduce Eurocentric patriarchal capitalist values and ontologies through artistic expression. Responsibility to challenge these inequalities in the arts are not the responsibility of the individual. They're the responsibility of all of us, of policymakers, educational institutions, public funding bodies, commissioners, curators, and so on. We all need to care for and about challenging the long, cruel shadow of capitalist values, aspirations, policies, and social structures. Bearing these reflections in mind, I return to the question that's motivated my research journey. Can listening practices help understand how class background shapes creative ideas and experiences of success when working as a socially engaged artist? The answer is yes. Convivial listening practices across a range of applications, from site-specific to small-scale listening installations, to do it with other workshop activities, offer methods to better describe and understand lived experience of multi-ethnic class inequality in the arts. The value of care-infused, listening-led, socially engaged art practices are significant. In developing a socially engaged art practice that sets out to make space to work with and listen to excluded voices, it becomes possible to A, challenge the crisis of participation. Socially engaged arts and much of the creative and cultural industries are cut from white, bourgeoisie, male, heterosexual fabric. B, it becomes possible to challenge the crisis of knowledge. Socially engaged art as a field is still poorly researched and understood in terms of recognising how the working cultures and practices of this field enable or prohibit people from multi-ethnic working class backgrounds to get in and on in the sector. And thirdly, it becomes possible to challenge the crisis of criticism. The UK-based socially engaged art sector still has not been adequately scrutinised in terms of how it does or does not reproduce the privileges endemic to capitalist society. I propose that part of the collective struggle can be realised through critical artistic practice that cares to listen to and with others, to and with difference. In doing so, we may understand that our struggles against Eurocentric patriarchal capitalism are different, but in holding space for diversity and difference, it is possible to explore ways of challenging the status quo together, build worlds beneath worlds, tell and make new stories, co-create new relationships, new forms of artistic expression and messy togetherness. In building worlds under worlds, we forge queer, unstable and cross-contaminated, I'm just going to stop the alarm, bear with me. In building worlds under worlds, we forge queer, unstable and cross-contaminated alternatives to the failed futures playing out around us. In doing so, we may yet escape our zombie destiny. Thank you for listening.
Okay, thank you, Kathleen, for your very inspiring presentation. And we've got now something like 5 minutes to talk about it. And I just I've got a very a special question first concerning to the methodology. So sorry, because the presentation was very complex and I couldn't really focus this circle when you talked about the method. Could you add some comments maybe, or help us a bit more concerning your method of a convivial listening protocol? That would be great if you could add something.
Yeah, thank you. So I guess firstly I'll talk about the dynamic praxis method system, which was the circular illustration you could see. And that's really the methodology that I've designed for the whole PhD sort of practices research approach. And what I was thinking about is how I couldn't really separate material and relational socially engaged methods from more conventionally academic and theoretical analysis methodologies. And I think this is a problem that arises in practices research methods, is that I didn't really feel like separating out my intellectual and academic research and analysis methods from my artistic processes. So because of that, I designed this sort of alembic, a circular container that comprises of 6 flows. And in those flows there, I wanted to articulate cross-contamination and slippage and messiness in the different forms of knowledge I was working with in my PhD. So practice-based knowledge, intellectual knowledge, and haptic knowledge. So the overall methodology is this sort of like flow. A series of flows is the best way to articulate it. And I did build on Robin Nelson's work. He has this sort of triad of different epistemologies, know what, know how, know that. But I felt that my system was a bit messier than that. So that kind of describes the methodology of the PhD at large. There's detailed, I can detail the flows if that's relevant, but we can come on to that. And then the convivial listening protocol is its own methodology. And that's I think one of the main practice and knowledge-based outputs of the praxis of the sort of 5-year mission. I feel like I've been on a mission. And the convivial listening protocol is essentially, it's a protocol, it's a series of invited steps. So it's not really a doctrine, and it's not really like you have to do it like this. It's a series of guided provocations, and it comes in the form of a single newspaper sheet that can be folded up into a sort of A5 document. So it's really cheap to produce. It's a printed document. It can go out to workshops, be picked up. It's free because it's a really cheap thing to make. And essentially, it's got a kind of introduction to what listening is, intersectional listening. I want to talk about intersectionality quite a lot. Like, my focus is on class inequality, but I don't see class as separate or distinct from other types of identities and other types of oppression and inequality. So we could talk about race, and we can talk about sexuality, and we can talk about family background. You know, I want to stress that my class analysis is through an intersectional lens. But yeah, the listening protocol is like a series of sonic listening meditations that you do with other people. And in the back of the sheet is a map inviting you to position yourself on an intersectional sort of privilege and oppression circumplex. So there's listening activities you do together, and then you kind of map your privilege or inequality, and you start to talk about that through these listening methods. So it kind of melds listening with invitations for individuals in groups to talk about different experiences of precarity and privilege. And I'll stop there because there might be another question. It's quite long.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Kathleen. Yeah, I mean, yeah, thank you so much, because the second question is, we've got one more question at least, because you already mentioned it, is, I mean, there is an intercultural difference between you and me now, but still I'm very much into cultural studies, UK cultural studies, especially from the 60s, 70s and 80s. And so I was wondering, because I think it's maybe, there is this renaissance or whatever revival of classism at the moment, which is very important to me, by the way, because I'm coming from a working class family context. So, but could you add some more aspects about your findings about the special relation between the intersectional aspects focusing on class? I find this very interesting.
Yeah, I will. So I quickly wanted to say, you know, in the pervasive atmosphere of capitalism quote that I used in the presentation by late Mark Fisher, you know, when we talk about capitalism, we're talking about means of production, we're talking about who owns what types of systems of economic production, reproduction, housing, private property, so on. But in that quote, Mark Fisher talks about who owns cultural production, right? And I think that's like really central to what I'm interested in. How is artistic and cultural expression reflective of voices and experiences, lived experiences that have been subject to more compounded types of oppression and inequality, and how does our culture machine and the stories that become normalized actually represent these stories, and people who have experienced them are able to articulate and be listened to. So in the renaissance of kind of like an interest in diversity within cultural production at play within the UK today, I want to talk briefly about Dave O'Brien's work. He wrote a book last year out with Manchester Uni Press called Culture is Bad for You, which is obviously a really good title and provocative. And in this body of work, he and many other researchers, it's a collaboratively written book, it's worth saying that, I think he was the lead on it, are looking at the workforce, artists, cultural producers, script writers, TV makers, 5 minutes over, and kind of which voices are faced with barriers to being able to produce culture. So there is a really interesting body of work, and ultimately what my research has shown through secondary analysis is that working class voices, BIPOC voices, queer voices, female voices are still really, really missing from UK cultural production, and this is well evidenced, and I think that's of significant concern. So that's a bit of the context of my research before I hit my table.
Thank you. There's one other question, but we keep it to the group discussion. So I've realized it, an external question, but we're going to come back to that later on. So thank you again, Colleen. So many more questions, but we have to go on to the second presentation now, and we can come back to this, as I said, later in the group discussion. Second presentation today is going to be in this panel on asymmetries and sonic experiences of power. It's going to be on the one side, a totally different subject. On the other side, I'm not so sure, like it's a presentation by Hakeem Adam, and I see many interconnections already arising to the other presentations of this module. Hakeem Adam from the University of Arts in Bremen, of course, he's a Ghanaian digital artist and freelance arts and cultural writer as well, exploring the power of narrative, as he says about himself. He's the founder and creative director of Dandano, a Pan-African cultural platform for African film and music criticism and documentation, by the way. And I don't want to introduce too long because we need the time for the presentation. So his presentation is titled In Response to the Archive, Researching Postcolonial Identity Through Digital Media. And I'm very happy to have you here as a presentation and as a presenter, Hakeem. So go for it.
I'm in search of things in which I can hear myself. It's so difficult to talk about why I have been thinking about my identity and making work about it. For me, I believe it's about fitting into parts I think exist or finding parts that I can relate to. The construct of Ghana as a geopolitical thing of sorts betrays minorities like myself. In some ways collateral damage in a quest for liberation and a collective sense of self. We are the points that lie behind the lines on modern maps. We are the sympathetic strings of this cavernous space. We are amorphous, often on the fringes, and sometimes unheard. But simply put, I am in search of things in which I can hear myself. My name is Hakeem Adam, and I'm a Ghanaian media artist. I'm currently a student at Hochschule Bremen, where I'm concluding a master's program in digital media. The work I'll be presenting today is my master thesis in progress. It exemplifies certain aspects of my attempts to use artistic expression via the medium of sound as an outlet for research. I tend to focus on the themes relating to power and systems and their resulting impacts on behavior. I work across media with a simple goal of trying to engineer experiences that facilitate healing. The work I'm presenting is titled Ghana Airways. It is outputted as a sound project that examines post-colonial identities and instances of hyper-nationalism. In this video, I hope to present my research-led approach to creating this work, where I use the airline as a conceptual frame to unfold my understanding of the reflexive understandings Africans define for themselves following independence. I will do this by discussing three major fragments of the project, which are the fluidity of national identities, the oral tradition as a source of history, sonic thinking through podcasting. These three fragments form the core of my thesis, where through writing, I help to construct the conceptual and research realities within which I make this work. It is an accompanying element, offering context and reflection on my understanding of post-colonial identities. This exposition is therefore a short summary of the themes I have drawn from this process. Established in the early 1960s following Ghana's independence from the British, Ghana Airways was an independently owned and operated airline until its collapse in 2004. Its establishment was a manifestation of Kwame Nkrumah's desire to define a national identity for the new idea of Ghana, an independent state, a global powerhouse rich in resources, and the vanguard of Pan-African excellence. Ghana Airways was largely successful before economic mismanagement would claim its life. It would serve as a bridge for the Black Atlantic and the physical continents, and in some ways a reminder to the sky that there was a new nation around. Independence in the Air, African Aviation in the 1960s, an exhibition by Northwestern University, highlights this feature of early African national airlines in establishing new images for the African, through their branding, air routes, and style, all ultimately engineered at fostering a sense of pride. The national airline to the new African state was a way to fast-track your progress into modernity through the most advanced technology of the time. The airline for me is an effective lens for reconstructing the architecture of post-colonial identities, as these identities and depictions, some of which we still identify with today, were influenced by the airline. One of the questions that would emerge in my research is that of the nation state as a sonic artifact. Using Ghana Airways as a starting point, if we accept, at least for the sake of imagination, that the nation state is an artifact, what would it then be as a sonic artifact? Is there a song or songwriting tradition or social event that we could possibly identify as uniquely Ghanaian or Ghanaian enough, such that we can use it as a palette in some sonic reconstruction of Ghana? Why is it important or necessary to describe Ghana or some experience of this nation state primarily through sound? In my search for the traces of the nation state as an artifact that can exist through sound, I look to artistic depictions, be it in literature, contemporary music, or historical accounts, as sample sources. My task then becomes finding the commonalities, or axis points that persist, both in my memory and the perspectives and dimensions presented and documented in the work of artists, archivists, and academics, and then translating them into the medium of sound. In Ghanaian ethnic groups, the oral tradition operates as an archive where culture is encoded and transmitted through the performance of music. In researching Ghanaian identity, I consider the oral tradition as a transient source of material for reflection. I am interested in aspects of these traditions that characterize any representation of the Ghanaian today. I look to the kind of history that ethnomusicologist Professor J. H. Nketiah describes as narrative that is neither elementary in form nor is presented as coherent. The sonic event in the Ghanaian context, be it through song and ceremony, work or healing, can be translated as one mode for transcribing experience into material, in this case song. Through the conceptual machine that is Ghana Airways, I give myself the artistic license to unravel the threads present in some of these songs, the principles and methods of their design and performance, the social settings of their consumption and reflection. In my study of Ghanaian oral tradition, I'm therefore looking to abstract the sonic elements as evidence for or against my idea of what Ghana is. The narrative is never intended to be coherent. Rather, it offers a mode of thinking through writing and through sound that allows the oral tradition to be explored as practice and theory, operating as a material that can be used as sculpture in my nonlinear and incoherent narrative. My intentions are to assemble a sonic artifact that represents my experiences of the nation state. However, I seek an assemblage whose appendages funnel and filter perspectives beyond my own. It's a search for place and connection, as much as it is exploratory. Just as a nation state is a natural assemblage whose appendages legitimize each other, Ghanaian oral tradition is perhaps a convenient way of legitimizing the assemblages that emerge as mass in Ghana Airways. I was introduced to sonic thinking in a class titled Advanced Sound Projects and Theories by Dr. Petra Klusmeyer, Hochschule für Kunst Bremen. Ghana Airways, in its current form, emerged from this class. I pivoted my research to consider how thinking through sound could facilitate communicating my findings. I hold a view of podcasting as a fluid vessel for constructing non-linear yet nexus narratives that unveil various layers of my identity. Could it be an effective affective narrative tool? My main goal was to borrow from the mechanisms and constraints of this sound-based medium and create my own communicative parlance. The design of each episode of Ghana Airways comes from thinking through sound and reflecting through text, under the assumption that the text becomes a map of sorts for translating themes into space, where infinite points are interpreted as invitations for resonance. Through podcasting, I hope to use sound as a method for engaging in dialogue with faces of Ghanaian identity I find expressed in oral tradition, presenting my research as a sonic bubble where my warped understanding of who I am as a Ghanaian can resonate with some audience. My search is personal. However, I believe it could offer at the very least possible approaches for sound-based research and narrative making. The first 6 minutes of the first episode emerged from exploring the tannoy sound, a warning tone used as a prompt in many transit and transportation spaces. In the upcoming second episode, I attempt developing my own tonal centers within the work of classic Ghanaian music composers. In my thesis, I go into greater detail on how African sensibilities of dialogue, as expressed in literature and sculpture, feature as sound in the podcast. However, today's overview is a mix intended to work within the constraints of this presentation. Ghana Airways operates in my imagination as a scenario that allows me the courage and legitimacy to ask questions I consider forbidden. It is a machine, conceptual yet real, that allows me to test what I know about who I am. In following the story of Ghana Airways, I have come to an understanding of the oral tradition as a source of history, capturing some of the waves that lend our new identities their undulating nature. Through this project, I hope to share this undulating and somewhat amorphous feeling with you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Hakeem, for this fascinating presentation. On the one side, as I said already, totally different from Kathleen's. And on the other side, I see interconnections already arising, aspects of power, etc., etc. So thank you again, Hakeem. And as we're running out of time, I've got so many questions, but let me please ask maybe one or two very short questions, and if possible, two or one short answers, please. The first question is, I'm still thinking about your approach. You're talking about your approach as a machine in the final minute of your presentation. Could you add something to this? What is the machinery of your approach? If I got it wrong, you can correct me. But what is the machine?
Yes, thank you so much for the opportunity to present my work and also for your question. So what I refer to as the machine is probably like the conceptual and artistic conditions I place upon myself in making the work. So kind of like designing a system within which I can pursue what I would call academic research, but still have like an artistic output at the end. And for this project, it was very interesting to have this frame of like the airline. So trying to view it through an artistic lens, but also looking at this as from a research lens, like similar to how Paul Gilroy sees the ship in the Black Atlantic at like this middle space. So what is the airline in our like post-colonial times to Africans? So kind of like having those two perspectives, but not completely committing to one, I guess. So it's like a machine in a way.
Yeah, I see. Okay, so second question, short question as well, is because it's referring to Ghana Airlines as well. What do you think is the hyper nationalism within Ghana Airways? Because I saw the graphics, etc., etc. But please, you could maybe add something.
Yeah. So I mean, so how I approach the idea of the hyper nationalism is like so in most post-colonial states, there's a push to have like a dominant national identity that is reinforced across the board, and it suppresses a lot of minorities like myself and other people who have like different identities. So what I call the hyper-national, or what manifests as hyper-nationalism, is this whole push to have a very coherent national identity that is not fragmented and not segmented, but it has a really defined form. And I'm trying to present an oppositionary perspective of that that's not so baked in. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And one last question then, because this is really fitting. Could you say something about, you're talking about your different aspects of identity or your different identities. So if I look at your biography, there's the researcher, there's the writer, there's the artist. Which one was dominant within your approach?
I don't know. So this one is probably somewhere between sound design and writing. You know? I also tried hard to really develop this methodology of using writing to develop the work in a sense. Sorry. And then having like sound as kind of like this expressive mode of the research. So I don't know. It's always this amorphous relationship everywhere.
Yeah, we are amorphous. I quote you. We are amorphous. Thank you, Hakeem. So thank you so much. We're going to come back to this definitely later on in the group discussion. But I really want to say thank you to you and to introduce Lottie Sebes now, the third presentation of our full-packed module. Third presentation is by Lottie Sebes, as I said, from the Berlin University of the Arts. Lottie is a Berlin-based artist, curator, and researcher. So again, loads of identities from Australia originally, with a practice spanning the fields of sculpture, video, sound, installation, and performance art. Her research is driven by media archaeology, and she's fascinated by past lives, cultural meanings, and living agencies of old and new technologies. She's currently undertaking her master in sound studies and sonic arts at Berlin Universität der Künste, University of the Arts. Yeah, I'm really happy to watch this completely different presentation now, and still again it's dealing with sound, of course, and power and structures and contact in the end. It's called The Sounding Sewing Machine: Revoicing Gendered Media Histories. So please, let's watch Lottie's presentation now.
Thanks so much, Christoph, for your introduction, and to Caitlin and Hakeem for your presentation so far. Today I'd like to discuss a performance-based artistic research project in which I've investigated technologies which were predominantly used by women in history. This includes the sewing machine, the piano and typewriter, as well as a range of vocal simulators. I'm going to examine two interdependent fronts of my research which have informed and fed into each other throughout my project. Firstly, my historical research has revealed a constellation of machines which tell stories of entangled cultural and technological development over time, where technologies have come to encode and enforce gender norms. Simultaneously, in the studio, I've explored a process of sonic performative instrumentalization of these technologies in order to reforge and reclaim their possible meanings and uses, to twist these historical entanglements of gender and technology. So let's jump straight into talking about the historical aspect of my research. I've identified design continuities between different machines which correspond to their predominant use by women. For example, piano manufacturers in the 19th century pandered to a domestic female market by producing smaller pianos which doubled as or matched domestic furniture. Simultaneously, sewing machine manufacturers produced domestic style designs to differentiate themselves from the aesthetics of the factory. Hence, sewing machines and pianos became habitually thought of as domestic appliances and were often sold in the same stores. While professional musicianship remained an overwhelmingly male field, playing the piano in the home was commonly considered a graceful accomplishment and a good way for middle-class white women to attract a husband. Women's relationship with the piano was hence closely tied to the performance of femininity and patriarchy. In the early design history of the typewriter, we also see the appropriation of features from the piano and the sewing machine, such as foot pedals and black and white keys. This indicates that its association with the feminine may have been pre-constructed in order to position it as a woman's tool and thereby secure cheap labour. The same piano-like features of keys and foot pedals also featured later in the first electronic vocal synthesizer, the Voda. The operation of this device was reserved for women who worked as switchboard operators and may have also had experience playing the piano and typing, as playing the Voda required coordination and motions similar to playing an organ. The Zonavox was another vocal simulator operated mainly by women, which was developed in the same year. In this case, a recorded sound was played via two transducer speakers held onto the throat of the operator to vibrate their vocal cords as they mouthed words as if speaking. Non-vocal sounds could thus be shaped into speech. The Zonavox was used commercially in radio advertising and in films to voice the inner thoughts of female characters. In this way, the device was used either to ventriloquize catchy jingles through the mouths of often sexually objectified Zonavox operators, or to speak to what was presumed to be a majority female audience. Earlier devices of vocal simulation provide other possible clues to this trend of women's prominence in early vocal simulation. In the 18th and 19th century, speaking automata often took the form of women and people of colour. Examples include Thomas Edison's phonographic female dolls and Joseph Faber's early mechanical talking machine, known as Euphonia. This machine was connected to a humanoid mask, dressed either as a woman or as a racially stereotyped Turk. Feminizing and racializing non-human machines affirmed the otherness of marginalized groups in relation to the white male inventor, and in the context of the machine's operation, placed them under his control. The gendering of synthesized voices continues to be a pertinent topic today. Digital assistants such as Apple's Siri and Amazon's Alexa reinforce gender binaries with high-pitched voices, traditionally female names, and a flirtatious and deferential style. Here we see a historical parallel with switchboard operators, who were also expected to maintain a passive demeanour. A kind of ventriloquism continues in this paradigm whereby majority male computer programming teams control the way in which machines which appear to be women interact with human society. So based on these examples, we've seen how gender has become an inherent part of technological design, and reciprocally, how these designs have reinforced gendered divisions of machine use. Next, I'd like to discuss my own concurrent studio-based artistic research, in which I've investigated how some of these technologies could be reforged to question and redefine their legacies. Through this experimentation, I gradually developed a sonic apparatus for performance, consisting of two sewing machines, a talk box, a series of foot pedals, and a loop of archival recordings. This instrument became the key vehicle and set for a sonic performance entitled Veritas Ventriloquist. When using the sewing machines in the studio, I approached these devices first and foremost as sonic instruments. I attached an electromagnetic microphone to the sewing machine's motor, which transposes the radiation it emits to an audible range. A talk box, which functions similarly to the Zonavox, propels this electromagnetic signal through surgical tubing into my mouth. Hence, the sound which emanates from my mouth is not my voice at all, but rather the noise of the machine's motor, filtered by the changing shape of my vocal cavity to create different tone colours and spectral effects. In this process, I integrate my body and my voice into that of the machine, making it a part of the apparatus and transforming the sewing machine into a kind of vocal synthesizer. Freya Jarman-Ivans contests that the queer potential of the voice is strongest when technologies become audible. This includes the internal physiological technologies of the body, external human-made audio technologies, as well as Foucauldian technologies of power. Ivans argues that both the voice and the figure of the cyborg occupy a liminal space on the boundary between nature and culture, so between the bodily and the semiotic. In my performance, I strive to birth a queer cyborg voice and to use this tool for the disruption and the confusion of binary gendered division. The mechanical driving mechanism of a second sewing machine is also amplified, in this case using a sewing needle as a stylus, as if the wheel were a phonograph record. With this act, I engage with a wishful impossibility that the voices of women who use these machines might be recorded on their surfaces. My intention is to performatively write history in the space of an as if, to borrow a phrase from Sarah Noble Frank. If the voices of these women, which are missing from traditional histories, could be recorded there, how could we make them audible? Can we place ourselves in a position of attentive listening to these voices? And what would it mean to do so? Archival material taken from advertisements, demonstration films, PSAs, and educational films about women's use of various machines are also integrated into the work. These recordings are on a magnetic tape loop wound through the mechanisms of the sewing machine, allowing me to manually manipulate the playback speed of the samples. Through my intervention, these voices of authority repeat themselves and syllables stretch into incomprehensible drones, becoming abstract sonic material with which I can play. Judith Butler's theorization of gender as a stylization of the body is also negotiated throughout the performance. My body introduces glitch and noise, choking and aggression into the signal of gendered codes, which are crystallized through the choreographies we might recognize from the everyday performance of gender in our lives. This disruption can also be read in the sonic noisiness of the performance. To quote Andrew Brooks, interference and disturbance, figured here as noise, can rupture the fabric of normativity, revealing hegemonic power structures as ontologically unstable and chaotic. In resampling the archive of media history in this disrupted and noisy way, my intention with this project has been to take a performative historiographical stance, to queer historical research methodologies, and to make a claim to the gendered associations in the archive of media history. Before I finish, I'd like to mention that I will be performing Veritas Ventriloquist here in Berlin on March 26th. This is a release concert for publication of the work, which includes a sound recording, a visual research anthology, video content, and an essay. I'll leave a link to more information in the chat, and I'll also post a video teaser of the performance, which I highly encourage you to watch, as it will give you a really important glimpse into the sonic and aesthetic essence of the work, which I think is much better communicated in that format. Thank you so much for listening, and I'm really looking forward to hearing your thoughts and questions later on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lottie, for this fascinating presentation again. So many questions arising again, but I would like to focus maybe on one or two. Thank you again. Just one comment is, I was remembered of a couple of months ago watching the movie documentation. Maybe you've seen it, you will have seen it anyway, Sisters with Transistors, this documentation on female electronic musicians, important electronic, part-time forgotten by Lisa Rovner. So because all these pictures are arising here, I would like to ask, or I would like to hear a bit more about this. It's not yet a narrative, but I see an interconnection between something like the typewriter, the piano, the sewing machine, and then later on Alexa. So could you add something to this? Because this is very fascinating to me in its concerning stereotyping, etc., and gender, of course.
Thank you very much for your question. Yeah, I do absolutely see these interconnections, and I think that's what I was trying to draw out in my research. I do see a kind of there's also a connection in writing between these different kinds of technologies, and the way that vocal synthesis works today is it's more of a text to speech kind of connection, which is very different to the way that vocal synthesis functioned in the 30s when we were dealing with technologies like the Sonovox and the Voder. And in that way, I think there is a bit of a leap between technologies like the typewriter, sorry, and the and technologies like Alexa and Siri and these kinds of machines, which I think is very interesting as well. But for me, I think, as I mentioned, it's this connection of gender that runs throughout all of those machines that ties them together most closely for me. I think it's very interesting that although you can select these different voices for our digital assistants, they are default gendered in this way. And I think we have to ask ourselves why we need these machines to have gender. We know that obviously gender is a construct anyway, but as these are non-human machines, we could give them any kind of voice that we wanted. There are groups out there experimenting with non-binary voices for automatic assistance, so digital assistants, and I think that's a really interesting way forward, also for just challenging our assumptions that we make about gender for everyone around us.
Yeah, and it's very interesting if you look at kind of alternative narratives of media or music history, as you already mentioned. Yeah, I think. Did you find anything? Because it's really interesting. Did you find anything about the usage of these machines within music or popular music? Because I'm thinking about the typewriter. You know, everybody's thinking about some tracks or songs now.
Yeah, that's interesting. I actually didn't look specifically into the history of the use of the typewriter in music, although I'm sure, especially in avant-garde fields, that there's a whole story to tell there. Yeah, that's an interesting little side story I could look into for sure.
And okay, coming back to this again, the identities of us all, you know, in this, especially in this module. Again, there's especially the researcher, the performing person you are, and the artist. Or I'm just hesitating because I don't want to fix you within my image of any role or identity. But if you're performing, I didn't get it right because maybe it's a long day already. But is the performance part of the research, and if yes, in how far?
Yes, absolutely. The performance is part of the research for me. I would say that I kind of see the performance as like a culmination of the research, if you will, or you could also see it as a performative mode of communicating that research. So, I mean, in academic circles, we're obviously very used to reading academic research in written form. And this is a kind of experiment in how different ways of communicating what I have discovered in sonic form, in the staging, in the aesthetics that I use, in the movement, in the machine. As someone who's very interested in media archaeology, I believe that these machines have a kind of implicit knowledge, which is very difficult to communicate in words. And I think through this electromagnetic microphone that I use, I allow the audience and myself to experience this implicit knowledge in the machine sonically, which perhaps cannot be communicated in words.
Okay, so we can experience that on the 26th of March in Berlin, you said?
Absolutely, yes. Right. I believe there's going to be a link posted in the chat in the YouTube comments. And yes, there'll be a performance on the 26th of March at Morphine Raum in Berlin. And if you can follow the link, then there'll be tickets available there and more information.
Okay, so thank you. Or get in touch with Lottie. Okay, thank you so much, Lottie, again. And I'm leading to this leads me to the last and fourth presentation in our module, because again, I see a lot of identities, you know, like in the space of this or within the range of this presentation. And a special kind of identity it is because it's the Ultimate Leisures Workers Club from Vilnius in Lithuania. And it's a collective represented by Noah today here. So thank you for being here, Noah. And this, I think, there is a lot of information about the club and the whole approach within the presentation. So I don't want to talk too long here and just introduce it. The title is Exiting the Domestic Factory. And I think we can talk maybe about the texts and contexts of it all. Better to talk about afterwards because you're explaining yourself in the presentation anyway. So thank you, Noah, and thank you to the Ultimate Leisures Workers Club and exiting the domestic factory.
We have found ourselves in an era of neo-feudal disaster capitalism, an era scarred by unprecedented class divisions, state oppressions, and ecological crises. Now more than ever, there is a need for the articulation of compelling mass exodus strategies. Meanwhile, the pandemic has brought about a radical decomposition of traditional organizing approaches, resulting in both new compositions and a speculative, horizontal politics that has fed into many different conversations on what is to come. The Ultimate Leisure Workers Club, or ULWC, founded in 2020, is very much a child of these circumstances. The unusual format of our nightclub, without a physical club space, is in part an outcome of this situation, and on the other hand, it is an active effort on our part to radically problematize what, in fact, constitutes a club, its politics, economies, cultures.
Skirting the lines between a nightclub and social club, entertainment and politics, the party and the party, restoration and insurgent regeneration, the ULWC is a spot for groups and individuals involved in the struggle to open new terrains for social liberation and communal joy in the night and beyond it. Drawing our initial inspiration from the 19th century Parisian workers' clubs that laid the social foundations for the rise of the Paris Commune, the ULWC is a school of nightly conspiracy against the world of work, a militant research collective, a launching pad for driftage, and a shelter for uncouth revelers of the night. Unlike the workers' clubs of Paris, which spread so many years ago as a result of politically motivated closures of the theatres, the ULWC's network very much approaches the current moment of continuous closures as a possible opening point for the emergence of an insurgent leisure culture.
And so we call for you, our friends, to join us in seizing the night, a haven for lovers, revolutionaries, idlers, fugitives, and revelers, a great mixing ground, a social apparatus that disorients, erodes, and corrupts the daylight's transparencies, its accounts, its totalizing reification of social roles. The ULWC Assembly, co-organized by Anthony Ills, unfolded in the second wave of the pandemic as an online event in a span of 2 weeks, sharing talks from the likes of Annie Go, Community Bread, Aramix, Kristen Ross, and Mateen. It took inspiration from Poe's short story Masque of the Red Death, a Gothic tale set in the Middle Ages about a prince who shelters all his royal friends in a fortified palace amidst a plague, orchestrating a gaudy, fantastic, and endless party to escape responsibility for the misery that surrounds. In the Assembly, we broadly strategized how the abolition of these divisions may be accomplished through insurgent leisure cultures. We assumed the role of those excluded from and exploited within the prince's castle, those invisibilized workers who produced their objects of pleasure and security. Our communal existence a nightmare of their accumulated wealth and privately hoarded pleasure.
In February 2021, we launched an Ultimate Leisure Workers Club digital reader, prompted by the Assembly. The reader opens up with an introduction to leisure communism, a term that partly comes from the thinking of author Kristen Ross, and broadly engages with the history of the night as an organizing standpoint for the refusal of work and communal assertions over the day's endings and beginnings. In the introduction we wrote, leisure communism is a standpoint that begins from the contradictory, at times reactionary, class struggles within metropolitan leisure economies and urban flows. We do not take free time for granted as some empty allotment of hours where we can freely associate, but as an anomalous and contradictory space within capitalist societies from which the leverage movement is in the struggle against working time, against the capitalist ordering of the beginnings and the endings of our lives. Leisure is to be approached as a material standpoint within capitalism through which we may strategize its abolition.
Our online party, the Age of Aquadisco, took its name after recent protests in Russia, responding to the release of a 3D rendering of Putin's lavish palace, which has since come to symbolize our contemporary era of neo-feudal disaster capitalism. And so, with DJ Elisa Milano and some help by Studio Creo, we crashed the palace in 4 virtual streams, touching on the themes of neo-feudal opulence, abolitionist revenge fantasy, Slavic voting, spring looting, and non-joy. Continuing exploration of the home as a space of inequality and class rule, we arrive at our new cycle called Exiting the Domestic Factory. In it, we raise such questions as, what would it mean to refuse work from the standpoint of the home? What would a future without housework look like? A future without the violence, isolation, and drudgery of the private home? Indeed, what about the standpoint of paid domestic workers and cleaners? Those of us supplying the feasts in the homes of the wealthy, or those that clean the floors after our communal nights of revelry. And so we arrive at our current inquiry on alternative kinship and domestic worlds beyond the realism of domesticity. We attend to this inquiry through the histories of the houses of Chicago House and Mothers of Vogue to the tribes of Rave and onto the rent parties of the Harlem Renaissance. We have found that nightlife communities have long since challenged what a family is and how our domestic spaces may be inhabited as sites of labor, reproduction, intimacy, violence, pleasure, and escape.
Exploring lives of intersection between family abolitionism and the autonomous anti-work politics, we move through dance floors and urban gardens, communes, flats, and district community centres. Linking up with British curator Samantha Lippett in Paris and also at the commune outside of Vilnius in Lithuania, we collaboratively released a zine featuring excerpts from the Dolores Hayden's book, The Grand Domestic Revolution. Hayden introduces 19th and 20th century feminist visions about the future of urban space and domestic living arrangements. Alongside the booklet has come explorations in communal eating and spatial strategies for overcoming domestic isolation within and beyond pandemic conditions. Finally, we've begun to organise a series of queer mixtapes and community events called Take Back the Night with Danielle and Do Norms.
Okay, so thank you very much for that presentation. Exiting the Domestic Factory by the Ultimate Leisure Workers Club, and we've got Noah here. Noah, thank you very much. I again, so many questions, but first of all, I would refer to that graffiti which you showed us, future without home. It was saying without homework, future without home. Okay, yeah, that's a good one. Future without homework and refusing work. Do you see any, or what's your opinion when you're doing your kind of research, or most important, when you're doing your activism here? Isn't that work at all? I mean, it sounds like a stupid question, but as you're talking about leisure and work and all the paradoxes within this kind of work, So isn't it hard work not working?
Yeah, and I mean, that's a great question, actually. And I mean, I think especially in the exiting the domestic factory cycle, there's like we kept on running into this situation where we thought like we were kind of developing these ideas of the feast as this kind of communal kind of refractory social spaces, but found ourselves kind of on the blunt end of the labor of producing feasts. So each time we kind of delivered the feast, we often felt this quite severe, even asymmetry between the kind of the diners of the feast and those that produced it. In various ways, I think we attempted to challenge that spatially, say by moving the kitchen into, say, a gallery space in Paris, or trying to involve other people into the cooking process in this commune outside of Vilnius. But there's a lot of resistance to kind of forms of communalization of this kinds of activities. So, yeah.
Could you say something to this kind? Which kind of resistance is it? Because I mean, obviously, in pandemic times, we're all talking about it's hard to meet, you know, and to share common aspects or evenings or parties or whatever labor. So could you add something? Is it a kind of a political, if I may ask?
Well, I mean, there's
politically?
Yeah. Well, I think it's I mean, when we started this cycle, it was last summer. So this was really at the there in Vilnius, anyways, in Lithuania, there was another lockdown. So we had all kind of experienced like more or less like kind of withdrawal from like let's say explicitly kind of like material, these kind of spatial communal materials, like kind of possibilities. So kind of coming back into them, there was like I'd say certain frictions and like confusions and like complexities, because we're kind of returning, but we're like, maybe we should think about how to return, like not to what was, but to a different, like a different present, something like that. But there's a whole knowledge of how to, say, cook together or do domestic, socialize domesticity and domestic intimacy and this kind of stuff. So I guess, yeah, something like that.
I see. Yeah, sorry for my naive question, but I was just thinking about it because this is double hard in pandemic times. You know, like I was doubling up all the difficulties to come together and to make something together. I've got one more question concerning. Yeah, I don't know if you found out something between about the connection between your kind of domestic work or actions and the body, because what I thought about when I saw your presentation, you're talking about, of course, the history of the night and a lot about club culture and arts and coming together, etc., etc. So if I look at, there is this special aspect about being at home. Is there any findings, if you know what I mean, how this is having people at home digitally or analog or working during nighttime? If there is any research on what happens to the body, if you know what I mean?
What do you mean body? Like the
Yeah, if it's just an open question, don't get me wrong. Just if there is any effects. I'm thinking about night shift. You know, working at night, you get more money for it. But if you're talking about exhibitions or theater, you know, yeah.
I understand. Sorry, yeah, sure. Yeah, and of course, like, yeah, we're entering this new space where like the labor process has been really like reintegrated into the home now. And like at first there was a crisis of productivity internationally, but companies very quickly adapted work process and centered them on the home. So as for me and many people around me, like
nobody went back to offices. So like the home has become, in a sense, more and more a kind of a site that's not only of domestic labor, but also of what was formerly understood as non-domestic labor, and the forms of exploitation and also of resistance and refusal have changed. So, I mean, it's interesting to ask like what it means to refuse these forms of like the chair or something like this, or these different like pressures and forces that would weigh on us in the social space of the home. But also that's interesting with music communities, and yeah, also like crip raves and digital kind of like interactive spaces, such as what CTM like did last year and everything, and all of this kind of stuff. So yeah, I mean, that's a very open thing, and something I think we really want to continue to a bit explore, something like this. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, no, I think I was heading for that, and especially in pandemic times, there's so many aspects about this. It's an old discussion, you know, about the home office and the creative businesses working all the time and no more free time. You know, that was so fascinating and interesting. And I see interconnections to the other presentations we had here, and the aspects of culture and body and communication, etc., etc. Thank you again, Noah, and please say thank you to the collective, of course, in Vilnius. And now we are heading over to the final 15 minutes, or it's something like 10 to 15 minutes now, with a group discussion. And I would really motivate everybody to send us questions. We've got already 2 questions which were sent before I mentioned that, so I would like to ask them at first, and I think I put them, or maybe someone can put them into the chat for the presenters, but I can read it out as well. There's one question concerning Kathleen's talk. I just quote, have you ever looked, I quote as Lippert, have you ever looked into deep listening? Quite an interesting process in relation to socially engaged art practice-based research, Kathleen. Did you get that one?
Yeah, I can see that, thank you. Yeah, I'm really into the work of Pauline Oliveros, who's the artist who is one of the kind of leading thinker, maker, sonic facilitators of deep listening practice. And I do incorporate deep listening into sort of my own conception of listening, you know, when we're trying to define the practices we use in my dematerialized practice. My work sometimes takes material form, but often it takes sort of relational and discursive and dialogic forms. But yeah, what I like about deep listening is this kind of ability to zone in and out of like global and local listening at once, whether that's to sonic environments that we're in now, or other people, or sort of more than human life forms. So I do really resonate with deep listening. And I think the other thing to say is it's also, for me, deep listening is about quality of attention. And I think I'm really interested in listening as a sort of metaphor / code / like, you know, question mark about how do we attribute attention to who, like who are we giving attention to, and what are our methods for like better defining types of attention. And quick one on that is I've done a training in like this method called co-counseling, which has nothing to do with my art practice, but actually is turns out it's pretty interesting, and it's a mutual aid. It's a demonetized form of mutual counseling, but it's really premised on like a type of attention contract. So that's another link to kind of, I think, deep listening in practice. And it's also quite interesting because it facilitates a community of practice that can give non-professional, non-expert support without trading money. So it's essentially like free counseling, but it puts listening at its heart, which is quite interesting. Yeah, thanks for that question.
Thank you, Kathleen. And talking about communication, there's another question concerning accents. As Lippert asking again now for Lottie's talk, I quote for everybody, I was curious to hear if you've come across anything to do with accent preferences, I think this is possibly more relevant for advertising and telephone operators. For example, in the UK, Northern accents are often more common in telephone banking or telephone sales, as they are interpreted as more approachable. God, I could tell you something about German accents by that way. Lottie, please.
That's a very interesting question. Thank you. I did not really look into that so much in this particular research project, but it is quite relevant to some research that I'm just starting now, which is looks into the history of the kind of intersection of ethnomusicological recordings, and at the beginning of the phonograph, when in a kind of colonial context, when you have Europeans bringing phonographs into non-European spaces in order to record the musics from all around the world, and the kind of asymmetric listening that you have going on in that kind of scenario, and the asymmetries of power that you have in this, potentially well-intentioned desire to collect music from all around the world, but without knowledge of understanding the kind of imperial power relationship that you bring into that scenario, and the gaze that you bring onto, the sonic gaze, if you will, onto these kinds of materials. And there's the intersection of this history with also speech scientists and phoneticians who were recording different accents and different languages from around the world, who were able to study the world languages for the first time from recordings rather than from their notes, and I think that there is an interesting intersection there in terms of speech synthesis. There were some of the same people, for example, Karl Strumpf, who was involved in recording accents and voices from around the world. In the World War I era, he was actually recording voices from prisoner of war camps in Germany. And at the same time, he was building a speech synthesizer in order to learn more about the voice. And so I think, if you look at it from a historical perspective, as I often do, I think there are some deep roots there. And this is just the beginning of that research for me. So there's a lot of question marks there. There's a lot more to learn. But it's definitely an intersection of power structures. This is not just something that runs along gender lines. It's very complex processes of marginalization that are associated with voice and how we respond to voice.
Okay, there is a comment. Noah, you want to add something, please?
Yeah, some more comment than a question. Yeah, I found it really interesting how your research on the gendering of technology, and through this idea of the division of labor and how that appears domestically, and the kind of actually shaping of technologies for the home, and also through that devaluing the work of the people that use them. So it was a quite nice line of connection and a good point of kind of dialogue with what we're up to. So
absolutely, yeah, for sure. I think it's very interesting the way that the gendering of a machine could lead to the devaluing of that labor. As Caitlin also mentioned, there are so many care-related fields in the workplace that are still majority women, because women are still associated with this kind of care work, and then that becomes devalued and economically devalued as well. So I think these intersections of technology and technological design with gender and with economics, it's very entangled.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And I think Kathleen has got something to add, or a question for Noah. So yeah. Kathleen, please.
Super interesting to think about sort of gendered aspects of domestic technologies and domestic sort of gendered roles that play out privately or publicly. And I had a question linking specifically to your presentation, Noah, so thanks for that. It's really interesting. Really like the title, Exiting the Domestic Factory. I've got a hard emotional relate to that provocation, but I was just curious, how do you describe the features of the domestic factory now and in recent history? I was genuinely interested, how might we describe the domestic factory? And then what does your exiting, or the collective's exiting, look like? What's the alternative in feeling as well, emotional, affective states, not just
Yeah,
what we do?
sure. Yeah, thanks for the question. Yeah, so I mean, I guess with the domestic factory, I think we should be careful to not overly center like domesticity as like a kind of predefined space, like the home, because as well, we already kind of talked about began to talk about with care work. Care work is a form of domestic labor that's introduced and socialized into the market as paid domestic work, right? So exiting the domestic factory obviously is also concerned, say, thinking about, let's say, the asymmetries of the experience of clubs. So more and more now, there's more thinking about how to organize clubs, and like you say, thinking about unions for DJs or bartenders. But like, what does it mean to include cleaners into the cultures and politics of clubbing, and what is there? Where's the place for joy, the joy of the cleaner in the dance floor? And like, how do we not only spatially break down what domesticity is, but also temporally, like the division of the temporalities of joy and labor, and their invisibilization on dance floors, but also in other places, gardens and elsewhere. So, yeah.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Noah. I mean, this leads us to another big kind of topic. Like everybody's always talking about the cool DJs and not about the DJs playing at wedding parties, yeah, or at, I don't know, factories. And if people are, yeah, or the same with talking. I'm doing research on journalism, but no one's talking about designers, like or the assistants, yeah, or the freelancing journalists. There's a lot of empirical work about everybody else in journalism, especially if it leads to music journalism, especially, but not about freelancers. But it's 99% freelancing people doing music journalism, as an example. Just so, wow, we've got some more seconds, and I'm thinking about. I think it was Lottie said something very important to me, which is very, very, to me as a host, very inspiring. With seeing all your 4 presentations, I think it was in inverted commas, but I would still refer to it. It's the sonic gaze. So I would like to ask one more question, because I'm coming from communication studies, and in Germany, communication studies are not dealing at all with audio or with olfactory kind of senses and elements. So not at all. And I'm preparing a big research project for this. So I would like to ask Hakeem maybe one more question, because concerning the sonic gaze and your approach, how can you explain, because you've looked into so much material concerning Ghanaian Airways, or Ghana Airways, sorry. Did you find anything about sound or about olfactory aspects?
Yeah, I think this is quite interesting, and it's probably like one of the the main parts of my research, which is dealing with what we would call like oral tradition or oral modes of knowledge production. So I'm thinking about in regards to like the sonic gaze. There's a lot of research by early Ghanaian ethnomusicologists into how oral knowledge forms of production are not really studied, just because of the limitations of the academics who are studying early African modes of knowledge production. So in my work, I'm trying to, that's why I said earlier on, it's kind of like in the middle ground between writing and thinking through sound, because I'm trying to also like put a spotlight on new oral modes of production, of knowledge production that exist and that we're experiencing. Like think of things like podcasting and the different knowledge spheres that revolve around that evolving media. So that's kind of like my take on the sonic gaze, I guess, is to like look at it more in terms of knowledge production and what does it mean for communities that are not strictly literate in the academic sense, and what does that then mean for them to, one, represent themselves, and also for other people to interpret their representations, I guess.
Yeah, and other way around maybe as well, because I thought like in the module 1, there was a presentation about, not about, but it referred to, or the presenter asked for the sound of cancer, being a hospital at Krankenhaus. And there's not much knowledge about the sound of cancer within our culture. So I would put it even the other way around and say, maybe this is leading to a bad kind of myth constructing, like that presenter said before in module 1. It's we're not used to it, and part of not being used to it might be that there's been no aspects, no research, no talking about, sounds and olfactory elements of all these sicknesses, illnesses, labors, works, and all the aspects you presented here. This is very, very inspiring to me to see it all. So wow, so many. I would like to ask one last question. I already said to you, let's try it, because Anita did it in the first module, and it sounds trivial questions are the most complex ones. So let me ask the question, because it's the motto of the whole CTM, and it's meant very, very openly, all the 4 of you, how to contact. I'm just quoting Anita from module 1. How to contact. Any answer? Noah? First one.
You can come back to me.
Yeah, no problem.
I think maybe for me, there was something I think was Caitlin said about the quality of attention. I don't know, it kind of really stuck to me, and like thinking with this whole idea of contact and like listening. So like maybe that's my answer. I'll steal it from Caitlin. The quality of attention is how to contact. Sorry.
No, very, very. I thought about that. Lottie or Kathleen, any suggestions?
Yeah, I'll steal one from Hakeem, and we can all steal from each other. He mentioned experiences that facilitate healing, and that was something that really stuck with me, and that I think was something that we've all 4 of us have touched on in our different works today that we discussed today. We've all come up with our own ways of facilitating this kind of experience, and for me that's a very intimate contact that you can create through that kind of experience.
Yeah, thank you so much. Kathleen?
Yeah, I'll build on that. I think I'm really interested in attention healing, but space for cross-contamination and antagonism as kind of necessary and positive processes involved with negotiating edges and boundaries and understanding. So I'd kind of connect through mess, basically.
Yeah, okay. And Noah, you want to add something, or you don't have to? Don't get me wrong, because we're already over time now.
It's been a pleasure to be in contact with all of you, and so I feel like I met some new conspirators, and learned a few things. So that's nice.
Thank you so much, Noah. I would just add, I think what I learned here again is it's the quality of the contact and not the quantity. That's important, and that's very hard to manage. Like all the emails coming into your mail account, and you really want to have some quality communication. Anyway, thank you to Kathleen, to Hakeem, to Lottie, and to Noah and his collective. Thank you so much. And everybody can watch the presentations still at the website of the CTM Festival, and we're doing now a kind of a 35-minute break. Thank you, everybody, especially the audience, for sending us those questions. I'm still thinking about the accent question. Thank you so much, and I should say that we come back to module 3, hosted by my fantastic colleague Sabine Sanyo at 4 p.m. See you there. Thank you, everybody, and have a nice Saturday Sonic gaze. See you. Bye-bye.